Hi everyone, Master P here from the Language of Composition 3rd edition. We are talking about game day. That is the day you are taking your AP Language and Composition exam. And specifically, we're looking at the timing of the exam, how much time you have to take the exam, and how you can use time to help you succeed. So let's take a look at the exam format. When you sit down to take the AP Language and Composition exam, you will essentially be taking two sections. The first section is the multiple choice section, and this is the section that you'll be taking first. This section consists of 52 to 55 questions, all of which are based on nonfiction texts. So you're talking about essays, speeches, letters, right? Texts such as those. Your score for this section will consist or will make up 45% of your final exam score. When you get your score report from the College Board, you will have a score ranging from 0 to 5. Most colleges consider a 3 to be worthy of college credit, right? So you'll get what is called your composite score, which consists of this multiple choice section and the second section, which is the writing section or the free response section. So in between these two sections, you will have a break, which means you can't use the time from multiple choice to start on your writing. Those are two separate sections. You'll have a break in between the two. After your break, you'll get to the writing section. This consists of 3 free response questions to which you will respond with your essays. And we'll talk about the kinds of essays in a moment. You have 2 hours and 15 minutes for that section, and it consists, makes up 55% of your exam score. All right. So let's take a look at the multiple choice section first. So for the multiple choice section, you may have 4 or 5 passages that you will be reading. You've got, as we said, 1 hour, which breaks down, if you have 4 passages, to roughly 15 minutes to answer or to read a passage and answer all of the related questions. Alternately, you may have 5 passages. Usually that's when 2 of the passages are a little bit shorter. And you'll have roughly 12 minutes to answer these passages. So the idea of when you get the exam, taking a look at how many passages you have, the idea of that is to help you guide your timing. In other words, if there are 4 passages, you know that after about 15 minutes, you should be moving on or pretty close to moving on to the next passage. This kind of checking in on your timing will hopefully prevent you from getting to the very end where there's 5 minutes left and, oh my gosh, there's an entire other passage you haven't read or questions you haven't answered. So it's just sort of making yourself aware of your own timing. The second suggestion here is to consider the order in which you want to tackle the passages. The College Board presents these passages in a particular order, of course, but that doesn't mean you have to answer the questions in the order in which they present them. So let's say the first passage is some pre-20th century letter, right? Like let's say it's a letter from the 1800s. Well, maybe letters from the 1800s are not your forte, right? That's okay. You don't have to start with that passage. Maybe the next passage is a speech from 1975, and you feel more comfortable with that language. Go ahead and start with that passage, answer all of the questions for that passage, and then keep going. Or maybe at that point, you want to come back to the letter. Definitely you want to answer all of the questions, right? That's a really, really important thing to keep in mind. Answer all the questions. There's no penalty for wrong answers. So you don't want to leave anything blank at the end of the day. However, you can be strategic, of course, in answering those questions you feel most confident about first. As a general rule, you don't want to spend too long on a particular question, but you definitely want to answer all the questions for a passage before you move on to a new passage. You can always circle an answer choice on your exam that you're still not sure about. Let's say you answer all the questions for that particular passage, but number 32, you're like, oh, I'm not sure. I feel like I still need to come back to that. Great. Circle it on your exam, bubble it in on your answer sheet. And if you have time at the very end, then come back to it and wrestle with it some more. But at least you know you've answered it with your best guess at that moment before you've moved on. Okay. Another suggestion. You want to be aggressive and purposeful with your annotations. So that means when you get to a question such as this, in line 9, scepter is used as, you look at the answer choices and you'll notice that the first part of the answer choice gives you the technique, right? Symbol, metaphors, and okay. And then the rest is a description. So always be aware that while this part of the answer choice might be right, this part could be wrong. And when you discover that, you need to be aggressive about getting rid of the choice. So let's say you read A, symbol of queenly grace, and you think, well, it is a symbol, but it's not a symbol of queenly grace. That makes the whole thing wrong. Scratch it out. Get rid of it. You keep going, and you're like, I don't know. This one, maybe. So you kind of put a question mark here. Then you get to symbol of authority, and you're like, it is a symbol, and it is a symbol of authority. That's my answer. You could circle it, and of course, you want to bubble it in on your answer sheet. But make notations for things that you're not sure about or things that you know. You're allowed to write on this exam for a reason, so use that to your advantage. Okay. Another suggestion, if you are running out of time, look for those questions that tell you where to find the answer. So, for example, a lot of the vocabulary in context type questions give you this line number. And that's basically a way of the College Board saying, hey, here's where you can find the answer. Now, you may need to read a few lines ahead. So you might need to read up to line, start at line 14 and read to line 18 in order to figure out the answer. But these are really good questions to try and answer if you are in that situation where you're running out of time and you need to be strategic. Another suggestion or same suggestion, be strategic about your timing. If you see questions like these, where you have that word except, or where you have the Roman numerals and the 3 different options, if you're running out of time, skip over these kinds of questions. They take the longest to answer. So instead, look for those questions that give you the line like we looked at on the last slide. So again, this is just if you need to be strategic about your use of time, these kinds of questions take the longest amount of time to answer, typically. All right, so let's take a look at section number 2. This is the writing section. You've been preparing all year. You've been writing your essays. Your directions will always look the same. You've got 2 hours and 15 minutes. The College Board used to reserve 15 minutes of reading time for the synthesis, to read the sources for the synthesis section. And you actually had 15 minutes and then you weren't allowed to move on and so on. They've actually changed that. And so they give you this suggestion now. So they suggest that you spend 15 minutes reading the question, the synthesis question, analyzing and evaluate the sources, and 40 minutes writing your response. But now, and this is kind of nice, they allow you to begin writing your response before the reading period is over. So the 15 minutes can be used for these ideas that they've given you. But if you read all of the sources and you evaluate them and so on in 10 minutes or 12 minutes, you're allowed to go ahead and start writing the essay. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. The 15-minute reading period, this is what it says in the directions, is designed to provide students time to develop thoughtful, well-organized responses. They may begin writing their responses before the reading period is over. So we already talked about this. So they are trying to give people time to do some pre-thinking, some pre-writing. But again, you've been practicing for this exam all year. Your teachers have been giving you some strategies. So you should, before the exam, have an idea in mind or a plan in mind on how you want to best utilize that 15-minute reading period. So you have 3 different prompts. You've got your synthesis essay prompt, and that's the prompt where they give you texts about a topic, and you're supposed to synthesize at least 3, and that's a very important number, of those sources to support your thesis. Remember that if you don't use 3, if you use 2 or 1, you can only achieve a particular score. You can't get higher than a 4 on the exam, or excuse me, on that essay. So you have to use at least 3 of the sources. Then you have your rhetorical analysis prompt. That's where you're reading a nonfiction text and analyzing how the writer's language choices contribute to his or her purpose and intended meaning for the test. Finally, you have your argument prompt, where you're creating an evidence-based argument that responds to a given topic. And that evidence comes from your readings, your observations, your studies, your experiences, any of those places or sources of your evidence, but it's not provided for you the same way it is with the synthesis prompt. So you've got those 3 prompts, which breaks down to about 40 minutes per prompt. Okay, and that's not counting the 15 minutes. So again, somewhere between 40 and 45 minutes is what you should be aiming to use for each prompt. Perhaps you spend 30 minutes on one and 50 on another, but keep this timing in mind so that you make sure you can write 3 solid essays. So that's it. We are so proud of you. We wish you the very best of luck on this exam, and carry on, AP Lang Scholars.